Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrishSportsDaily.com. I am your host, Greg Flamong, and with me, as always, is Jamie Ueyama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Thursday, June 29th, and we have a Hot Take Thursday show ready for you on this glorious day. I've already I shared mine with Jamie, and he is not happy. He doesn't like my take.
Well,
It's good stuff.
I want to see the response.
We're gonna have a spicy show, flaming hot ghost pepper takes that I have for you today. So that's going to be very exciting. And then whatever takes that come up in the chat, I've got Patrick Quinlan's already got a take. We'll put it up here in a second. So we're going to go through that. It's all going to be fire takes. So thank you everyone for tuning in. If this is your first time listening to the show, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell. Gets the show out to more people. That's what we want, right? Like that's the goal of all the shows, right? You want more people to listen to your content and follow your content and all those things. If you want to listen to our show just on a podcast on the audio form, links are in the description below of this show. And before we get going, I want to talk to you about ESQclothing.com. Jamie, I was looking on Twitter the other day, and staff writer for The Athletic, Robert Mays, he's an NFL staff writer. He got married over the weekend, and that's great to see. And he posted some pictures, and I said, man, that guy, he looks sharp. He looks real good. And then ESQ retweets, quote tweets it, saying, like basically alluding to the fact that he's wearing an ESQ suit. And I got to tell you, it's all over the place, Jamie. It's not just us, right? It's not just a Notre Dame thing. ESQ. It's popping everywhere. Ga is doing good stuff for everyone out in the Chicago area. So you want to check out ESQclothing.com. Check out their new bamboo shirt. We've been talking about it, Jamie. It's breathable, washable, machine washable, wrinkle-resistant, odor-resistant, feels fresh, feels good on the skin. You can wear it anytime you want. And it's good stuff. So head over to ESQclothing.com and upgrade your shirt game. All right.
Robert Mays, Chicago guy, one of the smartest football writers out there, in my opinion. Really good job. Did great job at Grantland and the Ringer before he was at the Athletic. Does a great job at the Athletic now. Smart guy. People should listen to him and follow his suit choices.
Yep, follow his suit choices, man. He's a smart guy. He's made good choices in life, and he made another one for his suit for his wedding. So congratulations to him on that as well. All right. Let's go to Patrick Quinlan's hot take. The Ohio State game is a must-win. Not saying the program shudders if they lose, thankfully, but they really need to win. It's home, sixth-year quarterback versus first-year starter. If not this game, then when? Is it a must-win game, Jamie? Ohio State.
I hope not, because I don't think I would say I wouldn't pick them to win. They could win.
Could.
I don't know. I think if you just said 6-year quarterback versus first-year star, I mean, Kyle McCord was a 5-star.
Yeah.
So it's not like he was, it's not just like some random guy they're picking up off the street. And I think he's going to be the starter. Maybe Devin Brown does. And I mean, Devin Brown was also a pretty highly rated guy. They have so many other pieces in place. They are loaded, right? And if you read Six Thoughts on Thursday today on ISD, they have both sides of the ball, multiple studs, draft eligible studs that are going to be very, very high picks. So it's a game where, and Notre Dame doesn't have nearly as many as them. Talent wise, just in terms of the high end talent. And usually in those games, those kind of guys are the guys who end up making the plays. And I think that's where, Notre Dame is always like when they lost to Georgia, those two games in 2017 and 2019, they just were like, they needed like one or two more guys, I think, in those games. And that's would be my worry about this Ohio State game, but it is on the road. Michigan bullied them the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Notre Dame, they should take that as, as motivation that at least they should be able to do that. But I wouldn't put it as must win. It would be I think though it would be. Clemson was a very big win. I mean, it was a huge. Clemson was kind of a must win for Marcus Freeman, given how on last year.
Right.
So it was very huge that he won that game. This game, I wouldn't put in a must win, but I would say it would be the biggest win. I think it would probably be the biggest win, easily the biggest win since that 2020 Clemson game for Notre Dame, and probably one of the biggest wins in the last decade. That's like, they're like a top 3 team this year. They're going to be great. So if Notre Dame wins that game in a game where they have less talent than their opponent, I mean, that's a huge, huge win.
I mean, Ohio State's going to bring so many fans to this game too. They're just going to be so many people. That's another part too. It seems like every time there's some sort of like stadium takeover, Notre Dame loses, right? I mean, that's just how it's been. So it would be nice for Notre Dame to come out on top. It's hard to say must win because it's September. I don't know. It doesn't feel like a must. I get Patrick's point. I get it, just because like they do need to, like, because you're not going to get Ohio State after this. So it's like, when are we gonna? I'm thinking as a fan now, like from Patrick's point of view, like when is Notre Dame going to, get over the hump against this team specifically, right? Every time Notre Dame plays Ohio State in recent memory, it's a loss. They lost to them in 95 and 96, and then you played them in the 05 Fiesta Bowl and you lost then. Lost to them last year, right? And then so they come in again this year, and it's like, is it just
15 Fiesta Bowl too?
The 15 Fiesta Bowl, exactly. So it's like every time Notre Dame plays them, it's got to be, it's because of this, it's because of that. Like, get over the hump.
Well,
so I get that.
They've had more talent than Notre Dame, but I mean, it didn't stop Michigan. They had more talent than Michigan.
Right.
It didn't stop Michigan, and it is true. It's a must win. So I think Patrick put it in there too. It's a must win for Notre Dame if they want to fast track what they're doing in terms of like getting that kind of elite talent. Yeah, it is, because that's how you win some of those things. Because I'm not saying like you win that game and all of a sudden, if like KVA committed was say he was an Ohio State commit, all of a sudden he's going to flip. It doesn't really work like that. But I'll tell you one thing, what it does, and it might not even work anything for the 2024 class. It may turn some heads, but it might not even work for but definitely for the 2025 guys.
Yeah,
that's where it does. And it's like, I mean, you want to go to us or Ohio State? We whooped them, right? I mean, telling you right now, if I was Notre Dame and I was recruiting against Clemson, just be like, here's the double Sweeney quote. Like, they whooped our ass. Like, that's just full on like what happened. So I think, those kind of games are important for recruiting. They definitely are.
I mean, that's a game Justin Scott's talking about attending, I mean, it's a big deal, right? It's a big deal. Thanks for that. Thanks for that contribution there. If you're listening to the show, you're viewing the show, if you want to throw in a hot take, we'll get it in. We'll find a way to get it going. But we're going to start with one of Jamie's. We'll start with one of Jamie's here. Let's see. Let's do blast from the past. Sort of, right, on Jamie. Tavon Coney, and I agree with this take. Tavon Coney, most underappreciated player of the last decade, Jamie. Why do you say it?
Well, I think, one, he's a fantastic player, and I'm not saying that Notre Dame fans don't appreciate him, because he does get mentioned by definitely hardcore fans know how good he was. But there's always there's the 3 guys who won the Buckus, right, for Notre Dame, and it's obviously Manti Te'o and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and Jalen Smith, and I think Coney is seen as kind of like a tier below those guys.
Yeah.
And really, I just think he should be in that. He's in the same sentence as those guys to me. And you could put Drew Tranquil, I would say, is arguably in there too, but I would say definitely Coney. He was just so good in that 2017 season. as a Will line. The fact that he excelled as a Will and as a Mike in those back-to-back seasons, 2017 and 2018, he was better than Devin White. Obviously was a first-round linebacker, stud linebacker for LSU, when they played in the Citrus Bowl. Coney was the best linebacker on the field that day. He was better than him. Like, I think he had like 16 or 17 tackles.
He had a crazy game. Just like the numbers were unbelievable.
And he was just phenomenal in that kind of big game when you're playing against that kind of level of talent. He stepped up. Okay, so here's some numbers here, right? So second highest stop percentage versus the run in Power 5 in 2017, 15.4% stop. So stop percentage, which is a stop is a failure for the offense. So when they're talking about like it's 3rd and 2, he stuffed them. They didn't get the first down, right? It's 2nd and 6. He held them. He got a tackle for like a 1 yard gain or something like that, right? Like it's that kind of thing. So his plays, it's not like he was just getting tackles. He was making a high percentage of tackles that were like the offense wasn't successful. They were in a bad,
like, how we always
spot.
say like, oh, the guy made a tackle, but it was 5 yards down the line of scrimmage or whatever. Like,
yes.
No.
So, he was making those kind of plays in the inside run game. He's the highest graded inside linebacker by PFF in 2018. So that's not nothing, right? Him, Jalen Smith, Matt Sarah, only 3 linebackers last 15 years to have multiple 100 tackle seasons, right? That's obviously pretty significant. Okay, so here's just the total havoc plays for these guys for their careers, right? So Manti Te'o, 52. I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? Really, if you think about it, 52 total havoc plays. So havoc plays are tackles for loss, forced fumbles, interceptions, pass breakups, right? So negative plays. You created those negative plays. 52 for his career, far and above everybody else, right? Jalen Smith, 38.5. Coney, 30.5. JOK, 37.5, right? Drew Tranquil, 28.5, right? But really, and I'm talking about at the peak here. So the last 2 seasons for Jalen, 27. I mean, obviously, the guy made a ton of plays. He was a great, great player.
Yeah.
No doubt. He deservedly won the Butkus. Coney, 28. He had more than Jalen even. And he didn't even play on 3rd down. 33 in the last 2 years for Manti. And think about how great that last Manti season was when he had 7 picks. He literally, how many linebackers do you see have double digits interceptions and pass breakups in a season? And that's what Manti had in that season. So that just kind of gives you the idea where like Coney is in that range there. And then JOK, 37.5 in his last years. But that's what JOK was, right? He was just a straight playmaker. He's a different kind of linebacker, a truly, truly great player. And all those guys, they're all like in their own category, right? They're all deserve to be mentioned. I just think Coney is just right there with those guys in terms of a different kind of guy. He doesn't get the love because he didn't end up being drafted, obviously, right? And there's reasons for that. He's limited a little bit more athletically than some of those other guys. And I mean, he's a guy, if it was 1995, probably would have been a 2nd round pick, right? But it's just a different game than it was later on. But he was just a phenomenal textbook inside linebacker, a great, great, great player, a guy who hardly ever missed tackles, had one of the lowest missed tackles percentage in the country both years, only missed 6 tackles each in his last 2 years, which is incredible when you consider the guy's making triple digit tackles on the season. I just think he's underappreciated. I think some Notre Dame fans feel the same way that I do. I don't know if enough do. Like, I really think he was, Butkus worthy type good.
I don't think people like truly like what you're saying. Like, everyone, I think, appreciates Tavon Coney, and especially his 2017 season. Like, oh yeah, he was really good. Like, that was great. I don't think people realize how phenomenally good his 2017 was, because first of all, he wasn't a starter until like week 3 to like week 4, something like that. I mean, he was a rotation player. He did not start the opener. Certainly, he was behind Greer Martini, and so just to like just to kind of underscore, right? So Tavon Coney in 2017 led the team in tackles with 116, right? Next was Niles Morgan with 92. Then Drew Tranquil was at 85. Led the team in tackles for loss with 12 and a half. Drew Tranquil at 10 and a half, right? It's like, okay, that makes sense. Here are the snap counts for the defense in 2017. Okay. Julian Love had 834. Drew Tranquil had 819. Okay. Niles Morgan, 747. Tavon Coney, 7th on the team in snaps, 545. He had over 200 less snaps than Niles Morgan and Drew Tranquil.
Yeah.
And he led the team in tackles with 116 tackles in 545 snaps. That's crazy. That is unbelievable production. I mean, and tackles for loss with 12 and a half. That is an all-time heater season. And so, like, to your point, based on what he did in 17, based on what he did in 2018, it's hard to be like, oh, you know, like Jalen Smith never had production like that ever. And look, we all understand, you know, different scheme and BVG and all that stuff, right? But even Manti's numbers in 2012 beyond the interceptions weren't like that. So
No.
it's just like he had in his 2017 season, just as a whole, stats wise, is the best linebacker season when you factor in the amount of snaps that he had, is the best linebacker season in recent history. It just is.
Yeah. It was like a 9 or it was like 8 or 9 game run of just like, because I think it wasn't until like maybe Miami of Ohio or one of those games where he became the full-time starter because Martini got hurt and he was so good that it was like, I'm sorry, Greer. Like he couldn't be. It's like, Greer, I guess you're just going to be the Navy specialist now because Coney was just that good. He was so good. And I just, I do think he that season specifically, he was definitely underappreciated, and his peak was as good as any of those guys.
17 tackles in that LSU game. 17.
I would say that's pretty good. Pretty good game.
Pretty good job. Good job by you, Tavon Coney. So that's good. I like that. I like giving some love to our guy, Tavon Coney. I'm going to come with mine, Jamie. I'm so excited. I'm so excited for you to get mad at me. All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's go. Notre Dame should have started Brandon Wimbush in the 2018 playoff. Thought about this a lot. Thought about it a lot, Jamie. Okay. It's not because I think he's better than Ian Book, because he's not. And Ian Book started the remainder of the season. And if they kept Brandon Wimbush in that whole season, they would have lost the game. They never would have got to the playoffs. They would have lost the game straight up. And the Roof was right. But here's the thing, Jamie. Here's the thing. Zach Davis loves this. See? Look at that. Yes, everyone's feeling it. So here's the thing. Why did Notre Dame?
There's one guy says I agree.
He was
everybody's feeling it.
He was the first one. Everyone's jumping on. Everyone's going to. You say when the chat comes. So here's the thing. Why did Notre Dame go with Brandon Wimbush against Michigan to start the year? Ian Book was better in camp. Why did they go with Brandon Wimbush? Because they needed that variance. They needed those legs. They needed that. And it proved out in the game. Okay. There were a number of scrambles where it's like they couldn't block Michigan that day. Brandon Wimbush getting out of there, right? 3rd and 12, quarterback draw. Brandon Wimbush makes it happen, right? And he also had that crazy live arm. Zach Davis is everybody. That's what he says. He has that live arm where you throw the long ball to Chris Fink, and he makes a play on that, right? Throws a long ball to Miles Boykin, right? He made a play on that. He threw another fade to Miles Boykin that was a touchdown and got called back because Miles Boykin misaligned. Right? I'm not saying this guarantees victory or anything like that. The way I'm thinking about this is Brandon Wimbush in a one-game scenario when you are not favored. That's important in this. The fact that they weren't favored. The fact that, man, they were going to have a really hard time block. That Clemson front is an all-timer. It's an all-timer. You don't have time for that. You don't have time to sit back there. You don't have time. Like, you need that improvisation that Brandon Wimbush gives you. In 2017, Brandon Wimbush led the team in 10-plus yard runs with 30. Josh Adams had 29. Okay, that's the like Ian Book was a great improviser. He was a great improviser. He could do those things, but not in the way Brandon could. Brandon was just a step up in that regard. And he was a wild card, and that's the thing. And that's why they couldn't start him, because you're playing a team you're better than. You got to know, like, hey, you're going to run the plays and you're going to get the ball out where we need it to be. It's going to be accurate. You're not going to have the ups and downs. But in a one-game scenario where it's like we have to put them in a position where they win with the defensive call, but we win the play because of something. And that something was Brandon Wimbush. So that's why it's like it's not like I killed him, right? And I told you before, like in 2018, before I was ISD, before I was like UHND, like podcasts and stuff, I had my own little pod with my buddy, the Untitled Notre Dame USC Football Pod. And I said at the time, so it's not like I thought about this like recently. It's like I said at the time, they should consider doing it for the very reason is because you just need that variance that he can bring you that Ian Book didn't at that time. Because the other thing you have to remember too is Ian Book had the rib problem. He was still dealing with that. He still had the cracked ribs. So it's not like it was, Wake Forest Ian Book. Like he was still dealing with that. And so I just think like it would have given them that puncher's chance that they could have jumped out to a lead like they did against Michigan in 2018. Like that's what they needed to replicate. They needed to replicate that game. And so.
No.
Yeah.
My counter to this is I think you could argue that they should have found a package to get him like some touches just to kind of mix him up just because it's like I don't think Clemson probably would have prepared for it the way because they didn't show it really, right? I mean, he did play that season. He started the Florida State game, right?
He did
it later on. So, but the reason why you can't play him is because the guy had the yips. He can't throw the football. He can't complete like a pass on the perimeter. He couldn't, right? And that's really what was the story with Brandon Wimbush. He was so inaccurate in those kind of things. Like what, it's been well documented, right? With his struggles with accuracy. If taking a shot deep with his arm or whatever, I think those throws were like easier for him than the 5-yard throws for him, really, because of what's going on. So I don't mind if they did some of that. Just to mix something in, right? Especially if you brought him in and then they think, oh, he's running, and then you take a shot deep, right? I like that. I like that. I think that's probably a good idea. Would have been a nice thing. But the reason why you can't start him in that game is that Clemson defense was way too fast. He wasn't going to be able to do kind of what he did as a runner in a lot of that other stuff he did, especially during that 2017 season. So, and if you look at the 2017 season, I mean, obviously you mentioned those 10-yard runs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all those, and he was maybe the best running quarterback in the country that year. He was really, really great.
Right. Like if you took away the sacks, he's over 1,000 yards rushing.
Yeah. So where's the numbers here? No, he was 921.
Oh, 921. Okay.
921. So PFF, they had 920, 7.7 yards per carry, 14 touchdowns. Like, it's pretty ridiculous.
That's
right?
legit.
That's legitimate. It's pretty awesome, right? But every game in that 2017 season, he had at least one run of 10 yards or more, right? Every game, with one exception. Georgia. And because they had dudes that it was like, oh, I'm going to try to shake this guy. Nah, you're not shaking Roquan Smith. You're not shaking, DeAndre Johnson. Like you weren't doing that. Like they had too many dudes. There too many athletic dudes like he wasn't going to shake Isaiah Simmons running down Jafar Armstrong like he was a little kid. He wasn't going to be able to do that kind of stuff in that game. So, all these games, right? 2.1 yards per attempt, 12 carries, 27 yards, 2.1 yards per attempt. So taking sacks out against Georgia in that game. And that was the only game long of 8 yards. And really that was the kind of thing they had they obviously couldn't, he wasn't a guy who was successful passing in too many games. Right. So, and without that kind of explosive element and really Josh Adams couldn't run in that game either. I don't think they were going to be able to run with him. If they could have mixed in some stuff, fine. But if that was going to be the whole game plan, I just don't think he was going to be dynamic enough against that defense. So I will say, after your argument, I respect the take more, but I would disagree that he should have played fine.
Yeah, it's just not as fun to be like, oh, they should have rotated quarterbacks. I mean, maybe they could have.
That's true.
Maybe they could have, but like it's just and someone said like imagine they only scored 3 points after starting Brandon Wimbush. Like totally. Like Kelly would have got crushed. Even if they lost the game, like you just like you do that and it's like look, it breaks up the continuity and that stuff. It's one of those things like I'm not like they blew it, right? Like I don't think that's true. I just think, man, like that was, I don't think it was ever a consideration. And I just think it's more of a thing that they could have considered. Because here's the thing, Brandon Wimbush did have the yips, right? Like he did. And it was not good. And especially because it's different against Michigan because he knew he was going to start, right? So it's like, he hasn't been sitting around. Like the Florida State game was like, hey, this is my goodbye kind of thing. Like this is my last game, Notre Dame. Like everyone knew he was transferring. Like it would be very hard to start someone who you knew was not going to be on the team the next year, right? With eligibility. So that would have been difficult, but I just think they needed something. They needed something to kind of change the dynamic of it, right? Because it was just like initially it was kind of clear. Like when it's like, man, I don't know if Notre Dame has the juice for this team. They needed something else. And then you have Brandon Wimbush sitting right there. It's like, this is an asset we're not using at all. Should have done something there. So, I just thought it was spicy, Jamie. I thought it was a spicy thing.
Extremely spicy.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next one. Where do I want to go with this one? Do you want to do the commits or do you want to do Clemson?
Let's go Clemson because I was just talking about Clemson.
All right. Jamie says Notre Dame will dominate Clemson again in 2023.
Okay, I want to change the wording here because I sent to you they would win decisively. So okay. I don't know if it's going to be dominant to the same extent that it was this year because I think Clemson will. I mean, they're obviously going to be pretty motivated. They got embarrassed last year.
Okay, let me just change it then.
Yeah, they got embarrassed. They got embarrassed last year. Believe me, that's going to be something they put a lot of extra emphasis on. Right. And
all right, there you go.
And I think Clemson, I mean, I haven't seen their schedule, but I don't think they play anybody out of conference this year. Oh my God. I don't think they play anybody out of conference this year that's worth a darn. Right. So, and yeah, everybody knows the ACC. Oh, they play Florida State at some point, and I think Florida State is obviously going to be good, but Clemson is, they're going to be a playoff contender-ish type of thing, right? So, they're going to be extra motivated in that game. And that game's going to be at home. It's going to be at night. They're going to sprint down the hill. They're going to touch the rock, all that stuff, right?
Dabo's going to pull a muscle. That's my hot take. Yeah. He's going to pull his hamstring on that night.
They're going to be nuts, that game, right? And they got a lot of talent coming back, right? They got a couple of really good DTs. They got I think their linebackers are probably the best duo in the country, right? Barrett Carter and Jeremiah Trotter, I think, are both studs. They got two really good safeties as well, RJ Mickens, Andrew Makuba. But they had all those guys last year, and they had 2 more first-round picks on the defensive line.
Yeah,
and Notre Dame took it to them. like took it to him. And I'm not confident in their until I see something else from the defensive coordinator to make me think that this guy is Venables or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he is. So I'm not confident they're going to do that. Also, I think Notre Dame actually is going to have a passing game this year. In that game, they just basically only had the run, and then they were like, "Oh, we only have the run, and they can't stop it, so we're just going to keep doing it." So I think Notre Dame will be able to like mix in and beat them with some play action too. And the main thing is if you look at their offense, and Cade Klubnik, he might be fantastic this year.
Mm-hmm.
He might be, right? Very well could be. But the one thing that could hold them back is one, I don't know how good their O-line's going to be. It's always hit.
They've never had like a good O-line, like in terms of like dominance. It hasn't been.
Yeah. So, and because of that, I don't know how effective, like Will Shipley's a really good back, but I mean, you know, and he did fine against Notre Dame last year, but I mean, he wasn't going to, he would have had to gone off for like 200 for them to really be in that game because they couldn't have a passing game. They didn't have a passing game. And are they going to have a passing game again this year? I do like, there's a receiver that I really like on their team who's going to be sophomore, Adam Randall, who I was super high on as recruit that I think could be a stud. But they've had a lot of highly recruited guys that, who's the last stud they had at receiver? It's actually like Justin Ross is the last guy.
Yeah.
Well,
before
I guess
before he got hurt.
Yeah, before he got hurt. I guess Amari Rodgers, you can kind of say, but he was never at the Justin Ross, T. Higgins level,
right?
Not Mike Williams level, right? So and DeAndre Hopkins, Sammy Watkins, they haven't had that guy, and they've recruited guys that are at that level, but they haven't turned into those guys. So as much as they've not had the Watson or the Trevor Lawrence since then, because obviously Uangale was, you know, whatever, square peg, round hole, whatever you want, or just not good. And Klubnik might be great, and I do think Garrett Riley will make them better on offense. But who's a star at receiver? And if they can't make big plays in the passing game, I don't know. Like if you can actually kind of put numbers to stop them against the run, I think Notre Dame, I think they kind of how they match up against Notre Dame. Also Notre Dame's corners too. Like if you don't have great receivers against Notre Dame's corners, I don't think you're going to make you complete too many passes, right? So I just think that Notre Dame is set up well against them, and I think in that game, I just have this feeling too that Clemson is Notre Dame's Ohio State to Michigan's Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. That's how I feel about it.
So there's a couple other factors too, because of the success. Like Notre Dame's had some success against them, right? They beat them in 2020. They lost in the ACC title game. Then they beat them again last year. And so those players, like they don't look at Clemson like I think they would look at like an Alabama. It's like we haven't beaten that team, right? Or Ohio State, like we just can't beat them, even though we know we can play with them. We're not beating them. Whereas Clemson, you are. And the other part too, Sam Hartman's had a lot of success against Clemson, right? Yes, they lost in overtime last year. What would he throw? Like 6 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns? I mean, he's not afraid of them. You know, like he doesn't have. When you have that kind of success against the team, you look at them and you don't think like, oh, I don't know, like he's going to go in there confident. He's going to go in there feeling like I can deal against this team.
And this is the other thing, when Notre Dame plays Ohio State, like you almost have to change kind of what you do in order to be like to play a certain way to win that game. Kind of like how when you played Alabama in 2020. And how they played Ohio State last year. And I'm not saying that, it's you're going to be totally neutered by the matchup against Ohio State, but there's certain ways you have to play. I don't know, more conservative, but Strategic is the way that I would put it. And I think against Clemson, because of how you feel, you kind of feel like, man, the whole playbook's open.
Yeah.
And because of that, so I mean, we'll say ending bench. Listen, I said win decisively, not dominate. Win decisively. So I think Notre Dame will. I think Notre Dame will beat them by double digits.
That's an evisceration, Jamie. On the road, it's an absolute evisceration, and they should shut down the program. Should it happen? That's what should happen.
You said
all right. Matt McCarthy says, hot take: if the 2015 team didn't have a lot of injuries to key players and had a better DC, they could have won the Natty. There were 2 plays away from being 12-0 in the regular season. So first of all, a lot of people say this, so this is like medium take, small take. But here's the thing. In one of the losses, like everyone says Brian Van Gorder is bad, and that's true. But like the loss in the Clemson game, you give up 24 points.
The defense actually played pretty well that day.
The defense played pretty good. You go on the road against Clemson, you give up 24 points. You got to think you should win, especially if like
turnovers killed them more than the defense.
The turnovers killed them. Missed the field goal. Sorry, Matt's boy Justin Yoon missed the field goal. Chris Brown turnover like inside the 5. It's just like that kind of stuff, and it didn't work out. And the other thing about the Clemson game too, or not the Clemson game, the Stanford game, is people forget about that game. Like they put up a lot of points. They absolutely did. But they also had like they did a really poor job in the red zone in that game. Like they had to settle for a lot of field goals where it was like if you could go up 2 scores, but then it's like, oh no, we kicked a field goal. And so then Stanford was always kind of in striking distance. And so there were a lot going on that year. And then it's like the injuries, yes, but I don't know. I just think the Van Gorder stuff, like it hurt them, but not like in the games that they lost. Like obviously the last drive for Stanford, that's a disaster. Like that's no good. And they had some plays in that game where it's like, hey, maybe just make a tackle. They threw the little stop route to the wide receiver, and I can't remember who the defensive back was. Comes up, tries to make a tackle, and he just whiff, and he runs in the end zone. It's like stuff like that. And obviously that goes to coaching, right? Like there were a lot of those problems with Brian Van Gorder's defense. So I get that part. But I don't know. It just seemed like the offense had a chance. If they were that good, if it was like we're that good, I think they would have been able to figure it out. And they didn't. So
also, I don't think that they would have beat Alabama if they got into the Alabama won it that year, right? And Clemson went toe-to-toe with them. But really, Clemson went toe-to-toe with them because Watson was unbelievable in that game. And they had like Shaq Lawson and Dodd, I want to say was the other end. Those guys were like unblockable that game, right? So Notre Dame didn't have that. They didn't have those guys. And I think I mean, people also forget like that team, they didn't even have a defensive line rotation. Like they didn't have enough depth. And you can say injuries, but every team gets injuries. They didn't have the depth to kind of survive it. And they didn't even have the depth to kind of deal with it. Like Sheldon Day, if you look at his snap count compared to like what, Jerry Tillery's snap count was in 2018 or something like that, or 2017, it's way down from that because even though those guys played a lot, just because they had to play so much more, they didn't have anybody else. They didn't have a rotation. Joe Schmidt started at Mike linebacker. I mean, it was not anywhere close to like, definitely not on the Coney, Teo, Niles Morgan, not even really on the Drew White level. Not even really, definitely not on the Drew. Like he just was not in terms of that. Like, so when you look at that kind of thing, you look at where they had like in the secondary, like Kavare they had, but it just wasn't. They didn't have enough talent. They didn't have enough. They had a lot of talent on offense. The top end guys were great.
They had a lot of top end. They didn't have any depth.
They didn't have enough depth, and that was something that and that's was Brian Kelly kind of recruiting. If you look at kind of like the back half of a lot of those recruiting classes, they didn't have a lot of wins there, development wins or like evaluation wins with a lot of that, and they needed more of that. It's a shame because that was a team that the top end talent was good enough to compete for a national championship. And I mean, I will say too, I think Pops, who's another cameo from London's Playroom in with on his daughter's iPad,
using his daughter's tablet.
He mentioned about Kaiser wasn't that guy, and he wasn't. So it's not like you wouldn't go into that game. And I mean, I'll say this though, maybe Kaiser wasn't that guy really, but he kind of played like that guy against Clemson. If you look at his numbers in that Clemson game and look at the numbers in that Stanford game
and in the Stanford game,
yeah, he was great in those games. So he probably wasn't
in
that
2016.
Guy.
So that's
he wasn't. And I think there's other kind of factors that go into that too. But I don't know. I think they had the pieces there, and the offensive line was obviously great, right? Yeah. But they had the pieces there on offense. If they just had they needed 3 more dudes on defense at the very least, and probably 5 more, really.
Yeah.
And a new DC, and a different DC too.
Andy cheat sheet. Oops, I didn't mean to do that one. Here we go. Kelly went for 2 too early against Clemson. Incredible. Like what? He never explained it either. And against Northwestern, didn't explain that either. Completely just mind-boggling. Didn't make any sense going for 2 when he did in either of those games. Down 21-9, you're going for 2. Why? Why? You didn't need to. You didn't need to, and they didn't get it, and then they had to chase those points for the rest of the game. Same thing against Northwestern. It's just you're up by 4, or you're up by 3, and you can kick it to go up by 4. You want to go up by 5? What? And then they kick the field goal to tie the game. It's just – I don't get it. Some of these things, and and it goes back to my point about if Marcus Freeman did that last year, everyone would have been oh, first year head coach doesn't know what he's doing, and that's what you got to deal with. It's Brian Kelly's in his 30th year or whatever it is, and he's making these mistakes. So,
well, I think that's one of those things that head coaches just it's so easy to say for us as we're watching from our living rooms or whatever, but it's just a different thing when you're in the heat of the moment, because there's so many guys who've Hall of Fame level coaches who do that all the time, make those mistakes. And it's they regret it. That was what Andy Reid was known for.
Yeah.
Before it was his horrible, game management prior to him, getting Patrick Mahomes and win Super Bowls.
Yeah. All right. Hot take. Brian Kelly inherited a better situation than Marcus Freeman did, especially roster wise. Because look, everyone wanted the culture, right? That was the thing, the winning culture. That was what Brian Kelly passed on to Marcus Freeman, that winning attitude. They had a bunch of winning teams, but Brian Kelly Marcus Freeman doesn't get to go back and have the 2018 roster and the 2019 roster and the 2020. He doesn't get to go back and have those teams. He had to play with what he had. He didn't have Kyle Hamilton. He lost him. They lost a bunch of pro players. The defensive line, as you said, that was starting to get depleted. The defensive line recruiting was not very good. The receiver situation was a disaster. Couldn't run one-on-ones, Jamie. They couldn't run one-on-ones. They couldn't do 7-on-7 because they didn't have enough bodies to do it. In 2022, they didn't have enough receivers to do it. Secondary was depleted. Thankfully, Ben Morrison, who Marcus Freeman convinced to come and didn't go to Washington, convinced him to come. Thank goodness they had him, because they didn't have him, they would have been in a lot of trouble last year, as we saw when Cam Hart got hurt against USC, and it was a bad situation. Safety recruiting, not good. Okay, that's been a disaster as well. Quarterback recruiting, not good. Same kind of thing. Whereas what Brian Kelly inherited, he inherited a ton of talent. Charlie Weiss was a very good recruiter. Michael Floyd, Kyle Rudolph, Manti Te'o, Ethan Johnson,
Matt
Cap
McCarthy
Lewis Moore.
listed a bunch of guys in his thing.
Oh, did he?
That. Yeah.
Oh, let me just throw it up here. Look at the offense. Jonas Gray. Here we go. Jonas Gray, Robert Hughes, Sierra Wood, Armando Allen, Theo Riddick, Michael Floyd, Kyle Rudolph, Tyler Eifert, Zach Martin, Chris Watt, Cave, Trevor Robinson, the O-line. I mean, Duval Kamara, right? So there were just like there was a ton of talent that he had to work with. And in fact, if BK was able to grab a quarterback from the portal like you are in this, like, because that was the big problem. That was the big problem, is that Dane Chris was a miss, and then you had to rely on freshman Tommy Reese. And that was the big problem in 10. That was the big problem in 2011. If they could have brought in a transfer quarterback, I mean, that team had enough talent there. They're making a run. They're making a big run, right? But obviously that didn't happen. But like, he had more to work with than Marcus Freeman. He didn't have to revamp. Like, no one was like, oh, you know what? This team doesn't have talent. They just didn't know how to win. The culture was bad, right? They didn't know how to win games. So they brought in some solid coaching, and the team got better. But man, like, we've talked about it already. Like, the 2011 team, that was a disaster. Like, that was such a bad job going 8-5 with that group. That team had so much talent on it. And so that is no good. Like, going 8-5 with the 2010 team, like, with the amount of talent that team had, that was no good either. So I just think Brian Kelly was really set up well from a roster situation. And I think I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I don't think Marcus Freeman was set up in the same way. People assume, because they've won a lot of games, this team's loaded with talent. I don't think that's correct. And I think that was kind of proven out in the fact that the last NFL draft, you had Michael Mayer go high, and that was basically it. You got a couple guys drafted after that, but we didn't have that top end talent.
I mean, I 100% agree on the talent part of it. That they had better starters, 100%. I would say depth was
an issue.
Was an issue then. But out of the starters, like, I mean, look how many of those guys ended up being NFL guys. Like, a lot more.
Harrison Smith. We didn't mention Harrison Smith.
Yes. Harrison Smith, another guy. Yeah. Like,
Robert Blanton, Darren Walls.
Yes. It was that defense was really good. The defense the first 3 years, unfortunately, the Diaco kind of recruiting kind of came back to bite them later on, but like, the inherited guys that they got, and credit to Diaco and that staff for, turning those guys into a good defense, because they weren't a good defense before that, or not a great one at least. And they ended up being really good. Like they had a lot of talent. So talent wise, I would agree. I don't even think it's close. Like, I do think that, which is also why and we've talked about it before, that's one of the reasons Kelly got out. He was like, he knew the next 2 years were going to be rougher. Right. And that's the thing too, is as you look at this year, the team is not set up to be. That's why it's like, when you're like, they needed to be, Ohio State's a must-win game. And maybe it is from a perception, whatever, but it's like, the team as it's set up right now isn't built for that, unless you get a bunch of sophomores who just blow up and play awesome. Unless you have some guys who haven't been great end up being great. Like a Riley Mills is all of a sudden finally, it just all clicked for him, and he is a dominant guy, right? Like, all these kind of things need to happen for that to happen, because they don't have, like, talent wise, it's not close. Like, especially like, they don't have a Michael Floyd. Like, Michael Floyd,
right?
Like, ever heard of him? It's pretty good. I think that was, the quarterback situation was bad, and that's ultimately what killed them that year, and probably the second year too. But I think, just as an overall from the roster perspective, yes. And then I also think Kelly did a bad job in the transition of it too. Kind of being like, these aren't my guys or whatever kind of thing. Like, that was a horrible thing. And I think if he would have done that, if that would have happened in this era, there would have been so many guys who went into the portal. it would have
yeah, absolutely.
Notre Dame would have lost a ton of guys, and they would have been then 2012 doesn't happen, and it could have been really, really bad. And maybe you could kind of get away with that as a coach at that time. You can't get away with it now. Yeah, talent wise, I think I would 100% agree. But I mean, I do think having Freeman, having guys, culture carriers, I think that is important. But ultimately, if you have the culture carriers, but you don't have as much talent, it's like it's tough to win. Tough to win as much as you want to, and be like, they weren't in a position. People thought like if Notre Dame could be like a playoff contender last year, yeah, they shouldn't have lost to Stanford and Marshall. Yes, obviously, but they weren't ever really going to be truly a playoff contender because they just didn't have a roster that was good enough for that.
Right. And also, like, I think people were more tolerant of, man, they weren't super tolerant, as I recall. But like,
no, they're not that tall. I don't know.
But it was like 8-5, right? It's like, well, it's better than Weiss, like that's what you could say. Like it was better than 6-6,
Yes.
But like Marcus Freeman, like if he goes 9-4 again,
it's going to be a disaster.
It's going to be a big problem. Like that's going to be a big problem.
He'll be on I don't know if he's going to really be on the hot seat, but people will talk about it.
It'll be and it's like he really needs to be big in 2025. You know what I mean? Or 2024. And so that's where it's just kind of like, I think people, there was kind of mirage there, where it's like, oh, you feel like, wow, I'm inheriting this great program and this great, like it's a machine and all this other stuff. When you actually look at it, it's like, I don't know. Like Brian Kelly inherited a bad program, but a lot of talent. And I wonder just like if you polled coaches, like what would you rather have? Would you rather have a ton of talent or would you rather have like a better culture, better program? So that'll be interesting. All right, Jamie, here's your last one. I wonder if you know who this is too. So your last take is Notre Dame will flip 3 commits in the fall of 2020.
I don't know who this is.
Okay.
It's not like an inside information, like being like, guys, get the crystal balls ready. Like it's not that. It's not that. It is just that, like, as we talked about on Tuesday, the recruiting vibes right now aren't great. They're not horrible. Like I think people like whatever I saw, people saying that it was like recruiting's a disaster. Like, give me a break, and okay, this also gives me an excuse to mention this because people seem to think that, man, Michigan is just rolling right now, like recruiting wise. And man, look at what they're doing, right? Look at what they're doing in terms of like how much better they're doing than Notre Dame. Okay. Michigan's average recruit ranking, 90.62 right now. Notre Dame's 90.61. 15 blue chips committed right now for Michigan. 14 for Notre Dame. Blue chip ratio 62.5% for Michigan. Notre Dame it's 66.7, right? Basically, people are just hyping it up because Michigan didn't recruit as well before. They signed 10 and 11 blue chips in 2022, 23, and Notre Dame signed 18 and 19. So like, because Notre Dame dipped, well, Notre Dame's dip is Michigan's like let's throw a party, like that's, I mean, good for Michigan for using 2 college football playoff appearances and turning it into Notre Dame fans' disappointment level recruiting. Like, they are not recruiting at that level. And even if you think about it too, like Jordan Marshall, I mean, he's a top 100 comps, but I think he's a good back. I wouldn't say he's a top 100 guy in my opinion, but he was at Irish Invasion last year. Notre Dame was like, we want Aeneas Williams. They offered Aeneas Williams and got him later, right? That was the guy that they wanted. So they saw them side by side. So it was like, okay, Owen Waffle parted ways, right? That's another guy in their class, another 4-star in their class. Jared Smith, another guy Notre Dame was like, yeah, we're not, they were going to stop recruiting. They took other players. So 3 of their guys are guys that Notre Dame didn't want, right? So, and I'm not saying those guys might not end up being good players, but I'm just saying, like, they're celebrating Notre Dame's kind of leftovers, really. And I think people are fairly saying that, yeah, Michigan did way better than Notre Dame on the field last year. They produced and developed NFL players better than Notre Dame, especially recently. No doubt about that. But let's chill on how they're doing right now. But in saying that, so I think Notre Dame is well aware, like, this June didn't go as they expected. And, we'll see what happens with KVA. We'll see, there's definitely doesn't look like there's a decision right on the horizon with him. Doesn't seem Notre Dame's definitely not out of it. Christian had an update on ISD's board, if you want to check that out, from, I believe it was yesterday. And, we'll see what happens with Gerby Lambert. Justin Scott, like I said, which way the wind's blowing one day, like, you never know. And Bradley Shaw, whatever, right? And obviously, if Notre Dame ends up getting 2 of those 4, the vibes get better, right? The vibes get better. If they get 3 or 4, the vibes get a lot better, right? And I think, but even then, you'd still say, it just doesn't feel the same, because they didn't have the flurry of commits that they had at the end of June last year, right? Where it was like, oh man, they needed to get these corners. They needed to get Christian Gray and Micah Bell. Boom, boom, got them, right? They need to add another safety. Boom, Ben Minish. Like, all these kind of things that happened for them at that time. And they haven't had that same momentum, right? And they're signing more 3-stars, right? So I think that, even with what they did last year, they still were super aggressive trying to flip guys, right? And they flipped Kenny Minchie at quarterback, which was a guy they offered obviously later, and then Armel Mukam from Stanford. Who were the other guys that they flipped? Christopher Tarrick from Wisconsin, who was like a late flip, right? Yeah. And then Caleb Smith, the only Caleb Smith now, from Texas Tech, right? So, I mean, those guys aren't really like turning. They're not completely changing the vibes or anything, but I think there's a good chance that at least a couple of those guys are going to end up being pretty good players, right? And they definitely all have a shot to be good players.
Well, look at a guy like Audric Estime, like he was Michigan State,
Michigan State,
and they got in on him, and obviously, like,
where would they be now without him?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think he's in line to have a huge year, right? Like, and I tweeted yesterday, like, you look at, like, speaking of, and that's the reason I knew the Brandon Wimbush stat with 30 plus or 10 plus yard runs, is because no back had since 2014, no Notre Dame back besides CJ Prosise had more 10 plus yard runs than Audric Estime did last year. And he not a ton of carries, 156 carries, right? Like, that's for someone like him, who it's like, he's not a breakaway guy. He's it's not like there were huge holes all the time for him. Yeah. He's did really well with that. And so he didn't have a ton of carries. I think his numbers are going to go way up. Like, and he slimmed down. He kind of understands, like, he understands, like, I just need a little bit more juice and I can get through a hole. Whereas this time, like, I might get caught by my shoelaces or something. So I think he's in for a big season, but it's guys like that who it's like, you grab them late, you just kind of fill out the class with them, guys who got in on a school as in the spring, March, April, you don't know that they committed, don't know their name, don't know who they are. They have a good senior year and they're not super fired up about, the decision they made in April. Now I have other decisions, stuff like that, and so, like, that's where things can kind of happen. Caleb Beasley is possible. No, he said he shut it down. If he's still talking to Notre Dame, the chance is still there that he's gonna just, like, what? I liked how Notre Dame looked against Ohio State. I liked how Notre Dame looked against USC. I'm still into that. So that's always in play.
And and I mentioned in 6 Thoughts too that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Virginia, right? Yeah. Jarrett Patterson was Arizona State. He decommitted in December, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's those guys. I mean, those are huge guys for Notre Dame. And then the 2016 class, just imagine the 2016 class if they didn't flip Dalen Hayes, USC, Khalid Kareem, Alabama, and then Ian Book from Washington State. That 2016 class was not a great class on paper, ended up being the best class of the Brian Kelly era. And those three guys were key guys. If you do, without those three guys, Notre Dame is not making the playoff in 2018 or 2020, right? Yeah. Like, or definitely not winning 11 games in 2019 either. So I think like these kind of things matter. And, not all of them are going to be, they might not all be Caleb Beasley level. Obviously that would be fantastic. And that does change the vibes, but I do think, look at how aggressive they were last year and none of the guys that I mentioned that they flipped from last year had offers at this time. So that's something to remember. So there's probably going to be a JOK and a STEMI, that a guy like that who comes from someone that they flip, right? And they flipped other guys who haven't worked out too, right? Like Jordan Genmarquise or whatever, right? Like, so it's not like it's 100% hit rate or anything, but you can still be aggressive and add quality, and you're taking more shots at it when you're doing it. And I think Notre Dame will flip at least 3. They'll flip at least 3, and it might be something where like a Mookum thing where people aren't super like pumped about it at the time, but then they become pumped about it later. Or even a STEMI too, right? It was like people liked him, but it wasn't like he was considered like elite. People would have been like, man, I wish they would have landed Will Shipley in that class, right? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things like that can happen. And I do think that they're going to be very aggressive. And I mean, I think we're going to see that more and more. And I think they've been pretty good at being kind of like stealth about it with some of these guys too. So I'm going to guess it's just going to kind of come out of nowhere. And then all of a sudden, I'll get a text from our own Matt Freeman. We'll just be like, hey, watch this guy. I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, I guess that guy's a guy.
Yeah. All right. That's a good place to leave it. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This was a really fun show. We're going to have to, we might just do one next week, Jamie, because next Tuesday is 4th of July. And so everyone's probably going to be very busy. I'm going to be very busy. You're probably very busy. So we might just do one show next week on Thursday. We'll figure it out. If there's something breaking that comes up, we'll try to fit in a show. But if not, we'll probably just do a Thursday show next week. So everyone can kind of enjoy the holiday and enjoy your families and barbecue and all that good stuff. So thank you, everyone, again, for tuning in. If this is your first time listening to the show, please hit the like button, hit subscribe button, hit notification bell. Links to our podcast are in the subscription below if you want to check us out there. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great 4th of July. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week.